You ever find yourself watching the news or maybe scrolling online and you just wonder why some public figure suddenly explodes? Like their reputation is just decimated overnight.
Yeah, well, someone else does something that seems, just as bad, maybe worse than nothing. They
Yeah,
just sail on by.
exactly. It feels almost like someone paints a target on them before the missile hits. Well, what if that's pretty much what's happening in our public conversations, I mean?
Hmm.
Welcome to the deep dive. We take interesting sources, articles, sometimes even books, and really pull out the key ideas.
And today we're diving into a really fascinating Substack piece. It's called Who Paints the Target?
And it gives this unique perspective, maybe even a bit unsettling, on how public perception and reputation and even, cancel culture might not be random at all.
Right. The author suggests it's part of this sophisticated system. Hidden, often. They call it narrative warfare.
So our mission today is to unpack that idea, this painting the target.
Yeah, we'll try to figure out who these target painters could be, what kind of munitions they use in this info war.
And what it all means, right, for people, for society. It's often invisible, this process.
And importantly, the source also includes counterarguments.
Right.
Maybe sometimes people do deserve to be painted. We need to look at that side too.
I have to say, this piece really grabbed me because it just flips how you think about public outrage.
How so?
Well, the author says something like, the missile is not the decision, it is the reaction, which is wow.
Okay, say more about that.
It suggests that what looks like spontaneous anger from the public might actually be the planned final step.
Ah, the result of a longer game, an orchestrated thing.
Exactly. It was a real eye-opener for me, a surprising take.
It's a really critical point, isn't it? This deep dive pushes us to look past just the headlines, the tweets, and ask not just what happened, but why and how it might have been set up. It's key for thinking critically about, well, everything we consume online.
Okay, so let's start with the main metaphor then, painting the target.
Right, so it's from the military, obviously, but the source is clear. It's not literal here.
In actual warfare, it means selecting the target, right? Like
Yeah.
with a laser or GPS before the weapons show up, before the F-18s or the Hellfire missiles.
Precisely. And the article connects this directly to public discourse.
Yeah.
It says things like retweets, op-eds, hashtag storms, even bunker busters in prose.
Okay.
Those are the weapons, the arsenal. But the most important step, the real decision, is who painted the damn thing in the first place.
That's where the control is, the initial choice.
Exactly. It's about the designation, the setup, not just the explosion everyone sees.
So the source lays out this kind of hierarchy, the targeting hierarchy of public destruction, it calls it.
Ooh, sounds dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the top, you have the JTACs of media. JTACs, that's military slang, joint terminal attack controllers, soldiers who actually designate targets.
Right. And in this media world metaphor.
The source describes them as long-range recon units, deep state scribes, think tank operatives, and sock puppet influencers.
So the behind-the-scenes players.
Yeah.
The ones who choose who gets the dot, the ones holding the invisible laser pointers, basically.
Okay, I get it. So they pick the target, then what?
Then come the munitions, the things we actually see.
Which are?
Reddit mobs, cancel culture mobs, podcast rage cults, op-ed machines, TikTok swarms, mass cancellations, algorithmic dog piles, all that stuff.
Wow. It paints a pretty bleak picture of how information or maybe disinformation works today.
It really does. And the source uses some specific examples, case studies, to make this concrete.
Like who?
Well, Donald Trump is a major one. The author says he was not an accident, he was painted. Constantly. Relentlessly.
Meaning everything he did was framed negatively?
Pretty much. Everything he said, did, wore, breathed. It was all targeted. The piece even says it was like someone used Umberto Eco's fascism, his checklist for fascism, like a laser sight, implying a very deliberate framing, a specific lens being applied constantly.
Yeah, that's the claim.
Yeah.
It's a strong one, obviously. Provocative.
And who does the source say wasn't painted?
Well, it contrasts Trump with others. It notes, for example, that Biden bumbled, Kamala vanished, and Obama invaded 7 countries and got a Nobel Prize.
Okay.
But according to this analysis, they got no red dot, no beacon. They were not painted.
So the source isn't necessarily making a political judgment on those actions, but using them as examples of who doesn't get the laser pointer treatment.
Exactly. It's about illustrating the idea of selective targeting. That's the core point being made with those names.
Okay, that makes sense. So if it's not always about the action itself, what decides who gets painted?
The piece argues pretty bluntly, you are only a villain when they say you are.
Oof.
And it points to history. Think about Putin. Back in the 90s, he was kind of seen as the guy bringing in a new Russia. Now, he's the new Bond villain, right?
That's a definite shift, yeah.
Or Saddam Hussein. Went from being a sort of regional darling to the literal boogeyman.
Gaddafi, too, had a similar arc, didn't he?
He did, and even Osama bin Laden. The source points out he was once seen, in some circles, as a CIA asset, freedom fighter, kind of a beardy action figure in the 80s. We know how that ended.
So perceptions can shift dramatically based on who's doing the painting.
And even Trump, the source reminds us, wasn't always painted this way. He was the toast of New York, a reality TV clown, someone people sort of giggled at, maybe vulgar, but are vulgarian, as the piece puts it.
Until,
according to the source, someone painted the target.
This leads to a pretty cynical view, doesn't it? The source calls it the fickle optics of power.
Yeah, and it argues that being targeted, being on the wrong end of the laser, isn't really about morality. It's about utility.
Utility, meaning?
You're useful, or at least tolerated, until you're not. You're tolerated until you are inconvenient, maybe even amplified until your script no longer suits the episode. Then you are painted. It suggests your public value is totally dependent on who controls the narrative. A bit chilling.
Very chilling. And it gives more examples, right? Not just top political figures.
Definitely. Julian Assange, from darling of transparency to rotting in a dungeon. Edward Snowden, seen as a hero, then a traitor, now almost a meme.
Elon Musk comes up too, doesn't he? Like, is he Iron Man or a fascist troll? Depends on the day or who you ask.
Right, and even the whole Epstein situation. You know, dead unless he's not. The speculation itself shows how malleable the narrative is.
So the main point is stark. Once you're painted, it doesn't matter who you were, you are now a target.
It's a powerful claim. But you do have to ask, does this view maybe let people off the hook too easily? Does it ignore real accountability?
That's a really important question, and we'll get to the counter-argument. But first, sticking with this main thread, the source digs into the how. The munitions menu.
Ah, yes. The weapon comparisons.
Yeah, it breaks down different media forms. Like Reddit mobs are compared to Hellfire missiles.
Why Hellfires?
Fast, cheap, disposable. They hit hard and fast, then they're gone.
Okay, what else?
NYT exposés are like bunker busters.
Slow but powerful. Deep impact.
Exactly. Substack callouts are described as laser-guided JDAMs.
Yeah.
Precise, often ideologically targeted.
This is quite the arsenal.
Yeah.
What about, say, podcasts, since we're on one?
Yeah. Podcast callouts get compared to white phosphorus.
Ouch. Why white phosphorus?
Messy, hot, high civilian casualties, meaning collateral damage to reputations, maybe even uninvolved people.
Okay. And cable news. The shouting matches.
Saturation bombing.
Yeah.
Total noise, nobody remembers the specifics, just the smoke and chaos afterwards.
These aren't just clever lines, are they? They suggest a real strategic depth to these narrative attacks, like a military campaign designed to overwhelm.
That seems to be the implication. And it goes further, using a pro wrestling term, kayfabe.
Kayfabe. Isn't that about wrestlers staying in character, maintaining the illusion?
Exactly. And the source applies it to geopolitics and media. It suggests figures are cast in roles, like Trump is the heel, the bad guy. Zelensky is the babyface, the good guy. Putin's the archvillain. Bibi is the eternal anti-hero. She is inscrutable. You get the idea.
Even Biden.
Yeah, Biden is either the calming dad or the empty chair, depending on the narrative needed.
And the source suggests they know these are their roles.
Well, the provocative idea is that maybe they all got the script.
Yeah.
Maybe they're trained for this in elite circles.
So it's not just news, it's performance. A kind of theater.
Narrative war, the author calls it, where every word is payload. It definitely makes you question authenticity in public life, doesn't it? If everyone's just playing a part.
It really does. Okay, so if someone is painted and the munitions hit, what happens after?
Source talks about people being disappeared. Not literally, usually, but in terms of narrative. It calls it witness protection for former targets.
Meaning they just vanish from the headlines?
Yeah, they fall out of the story, become invisible, ghosted, sometimes buried without legacy.
Are there examples given?
It mentions figures like Michael Jackson, Tupac, Elvis people, surrounded by theories about their disappearance, literal or figurative. The point is that removal from the narrative is also a tool.
So we don't just destroy, we disappear.
Sometimes for good, Sometimes as a reset, the source says.
Now, this all sounds very conspiratorial, doesn't it? Hidden hands, scripts, disappearances.
The source actually addresses that head on. It says, this isn't about conspiracies. This is about coordination.
Ah, okay. So less shadowy cabal, more systemic process.
Exactly. The power to ruin someone or bring them back is framed as administrative. It's algorithmic. It's editorial.
Meaning the tools aren't cloak and dagger stuff.
Right. The quote is, we don't need billets. We need consensus. We don't need assassins. We have tastemakers. We don't need soldiers. We have influencers.
And they're all...
All of them are armed. All of them are waiting. All of them are scanning for the next red dot. It's about the system enabling this, not necessarily a single secret group pulling all the strings.
Okay, that's a really powerful, if quite dark, perspective. But you mentioned a counter-argument earlier.
Yes, absolutely crucial. It's in an appendix in the source, basically asking, maybe we paint targets because they deserve it.
Right. So what's that argument?
It suggests that maybe this narrative targeting isn't some sinister plot, but more like democratic antibodies.
Antibodies. Or like a vaccine.
Yeah, exactly. A natural, maybe even healthy societal response to genuinely bad behavior.
Okay, so applied to the examples. Like Trump.
The counterargument says he wasn't targeted just for aesthetic distaste. He was targeted because, in this view, he openly mocked the rule of law, courted white nationalism, encouraged political violence, smeared journalists, and tried to stay in power after losing an election.
So the painting happened because there was something real to paint on.
That's the idea. And maybe Snowden's leaks did endanger people. Maybe Assange was reckless.
Maybe Putin turned the brush on himself, as the source puts it.
Right. Or maybe Musk has acted like a fascist billionaire sometimes. And maybe Biden isn't painted because, well, he hasn't tried to burn it down on camera. Not because he's protected.
So the core idea here is...
maybe the paint only sticks when the rot's already visible. It brings back the idea of accountability. Maybe the targeting is often, or at least sometimes, justified.
Okay, so we have these two powerful, somewhat conflicting ideas. On one hand, this almost invisible process of painting the target, driven by utility and coordination.
And on the other hand, the idea that scrutiny often comes because it's genuinely deserved, that it's a form of public accountability, like antibodies fighting disease.
The source itself seems to land somewhere specific on this, right? About consistency.
Yeah, the author mentions being against asymmetrical targeting. They seem to advocate for applying scrutiny consistently, not just selectively based on who's convenient to target at the moment.
Which brings us back to the listener, to you. How does understanding all this, the painting, the munitions, the counter-arguments, change how you look at things?
Does it make you pause when you see a huge online pylon? Do you wonder who might have painted that target first and why?
It definitely encourages critical thinking, doesn't it? In this absolute flood of information we live in, questioning the narratives, looking for the potential coordination behind the consensus.
And remembering that what seems like a spontaneous wildfire might have started with a single, deliberately placed match or laser dot.
It highlights that difference between the reaction, the missile, and the initial decision, the designation. Always look for who might have called in the strike.
The source ends with a pretty stark warning, actually.
What's that?
The beacons are already blinking. If you feel safe, it's not because you're good, it's because no one's painted you yet.
Oh, that's sobering.
And it continues. And if you feel watched, it's not paranoia, it's an invitation to the show.
Wow. So the final thought it leaves you with is quite provocative.
Extremely. It poses the question. The question isn't if they'll pull the trigger. The question is, who called in the strike? And who's next?
It really pushes you, the listener, to think about who benefits from these narratives, who gets hurt, and maybe even how you participate, consciously or not.
Yeah, shining a light, as the source suggests, not just on the targets, but on who's doing the targeting
Yeah.
and why.